In session 1, we talked about economic value creation and how economic value can be estimated. Economic value takes a very objective perspective to value by looking at how the customer makes a profit and how we can help the customer to make more profit. And this is why it is very commonly used in B2B. However, it does not take into account how consumers actually perceive value. And this is what we are going to talk about now. There's a difference between the use value, the economic value, the perceived value, and the willingness to pay. For the use value, you can go back to session 6. The use value is the competitive reference value, so the value of the next best thing, plus the positive differentiation value. It is the value of your next best competitive offering, plus whatever value you add on top of that. So the total value delivered by your product and service. If from the use value, we take away that negative differentiation value, go back to session 6 and remember the example of the ebook that I gave, we come to the net value delivered by your product, and that's the economic value. Now, the perceived value goes on a different level and asks the question, how do consumers and customers actually perceive those benefits? And the willingness to pay is then a function of the perceived value, because customers would never be willing to pay more than the value they actually perceive to have. This probably shows you how critical the concept of perceived value is for pricing and for marketing in general. Perceived value is a key antecedent of purchase. In a nutshell, consumers only buy product when the perceived value, minus the cost they have to give up, which is usually the price, exceeds 0, when there is a net benefit from acquiring the product. So perceived value is a clear antecedent of purchase. Now, perceived value depends on 2 factors. It depends on the perceived quality of the product, and it depends on what is called high-level abstractions. Sometimes we buy a product because it has a certain quality, let's say a handbag or a briefcase that is made out of high-level leather. Intrinsic and extrinsic product attributes play into this. The flavor, the color, the texture, the brand name, or the advertising that we see. But perceived quality alone cannot explain why people, for example, want to buy a handbag from Hermes that is certainly of very high quality, but even when we correct for quality, the price is still higher than what we probably would expect from an equivalent quality product that is not Hermes. And we call this high-level abstractions, because occasionally the things that we believe a product gives to us also create value. High-level abstractions and perceived quality, together with the intrinsic and extrinsic product attributes that influence at the same time quality and value, together lead to perceived value. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have the perceived sacrifice, which is related to the price. But it's not only the price. First of all, we have the objective price that the product has, $1.99, and the perceived monetary price. Because very often we don't perceive prices as precisely. We do not perceive a price necessarily as $1.99. We perceive a product to be cheap or expensive, which is usually the outcome of comparing whatever objective price we see to a reference price that we have in our head. And on top, occasionally, products have also a non-monetary price. For example, when you go to IKEA, it's not only the question of how expensive the shelf is, it's also a question of the time and of the effort of going to IKEA. Now, let me go back to the concept of perceived value, how it can be defined and how it can be measured. Consumer perceived value has 3 main elements. The first one is emotional value. Emotional value is the utility that you get from owning the product. The utility derived from feelings of affective states that the product generates. Some products just feel good having, they make you happy, and this is what is called emotional value. Other products have social value. Social value is the utility derived because the product gives you a certain social status, because it fits into the type of person you want to be or you want to appear to be. And functional value is the objective value that a product gives you in terms of price for value and money for value that you get. Obviously, different products are important in different dimensions. When you buy a bottle of water in the supermarket that has no brand, it is probably largely functional value because you buy the water in order to not be thirsty. When you buy a very, very high-end luxury item, it's probably less the functional value, but the social value. You may buy this product because it gives you a certain social status. And when you buy a piece of art that you probably only hang in your home and that you don't show to many people, there's probably not that much functional and social value, but a lot of emotional value in it because that product makes you happy. Now, different to economic value, emotional, social, and functional value, or if you combine them all into consumer perceived value, is very hard to quantify. So we cannot really put a dollar value onto it. But there are still other ways how we can measure it, and that is through a survey. We try to find out different questions that we can ask in order to cover all these different facets of value. For example, you ask, does the product have consistent quality? Is it well made? Is it one that you would enjoy? Would it make you feel good? Is it reasonably priced? And so on and so forth. You find the full list of the questions that you can ask in the reference that I put on this slide. You see that these questions map to different components of social value. Something like, does the product make you feel good, relates to emotional value. A question like, does the product give you social power, relates to social value. And something like, has the product consistent quality or is it reasonably priced, relates to functional value. And the approach to measuring perceived value is that you ask these questions on the same scale, let's say from 1 to 7, and then you take the average. And the answer is that on a scale from 1 to 7, the perceived value of this product is 4.44 in this specific case. Now, this may be disappointing because it's not really a dollar value that we can use for pricing, but this scale of the measurement of perceived value can be very useful when you want to compare different products. You can calculate the perceived value of your product, let's say an Hermès bag, and your competitor product, let's say a Louis Vuitton bag, and then you can compare the total perceived value as well as the drivers that lead to these differences. Another aspect that the framework of perceived value that I just showed you brings up is the difference between objective price and monetary price. When we price, we sometimes implicitly assume that consumers perceive the different prices in a very precise manner. We think that a customer realizes and perceives a difference between a product that is priced at 189, 199, and 209. And we implicitly assume that this difference is the same because we increase by 10 cents from 189 to 199, and we increase by another 10 cents from 199 to 209. But there are many, many examples that show you that consumers are usually not very good in recalling prices. You can go to this YouTube link and watch one of the Price is Right, a very famous game show from the 80s, where people had to guess prices and where people are terrible in guessing the right prices. And there's also academic research on this topic. This is an article that I also put into the pre-readings, where researchers went into the parking lot of a supermarket and they asked consumers for products which they had just bought what the price for this is. So imagine you go to a supermarket, you load up your shopping cart, and when you go out of the supermarket and either walk home or put the items into your car, a researcher comes, takes out a pack of yogurt that you just bought and asks you, how much did you pay for it? And we see that the number of people is very, very limited who makes correct answers. It's about 10% for mineral water and yogurt in France, and it's about 47% for the same study in the US. The error is huge, and only 70%, only about 2/3 of people can estimate it within a plus-minus range of 20%, which by conclusion means 1/3 of people are not even accurate by plus-minus 20%. Now, the reason for this is that we usually do not perceive prices that precisely. When you go shopping, unless you're very budget conscious or you work on a very tight budget, you would not really perceive the individual numbers of the prices. You would implicitly see a price, compare it to what you believe a product of this kind should cost. And if there is a gap, the product appears either too cheap or too expensive. And this is the difference between the objective price and the perceived price. And it leads to the fact whether people can actually spot a deal. And there is a very considerable share of people who, well, there is, first of all, if you go to the right-hand side of this graph, only a very small share of people who can actually accurately recall and identify prices. It's only 2.1%. There are about 13% of people who can spot a deal accurately, but there is a huge share of people who either cannot spot a deal at all, who are deal oblivious, or who are very, very approximate in spotting a deal. And this puts into perspective a lot of things when you do pricing. As a thought experiment, imagine that the supermarket you usually go to, where you go to every week or every day or however you often go shopping, would overnight increase all prices of all the products by 1 or 5 or 10%. Would you really see a difference? Would you really realize if your pizza increased by 10% in price? Well, you probably would, because the pizza is currently priced at $2.99, and a 10% increase would push it over the 3 button. But generally, probably a 10% increase you wouldn't really see. Well, if customers don't see a 10% increase, this raises the question, probably we should increase by 10%, because if you go back to the last session, you have seen that an increase in price directly impacts the profit margins. So a 10% increase in price leads to an over 10% increase in your profit margins. And these factors, which are much more subtle and much more psychological about the perception of prices, are really important things to consider when you do pricing. And the next part brings us right back to this, which talks about price promotion and a strategy called everyday low price.